Another abrupt exit. Anthony Scaramucci is out as the White House communications director.
No end in sight. North Korea forging ahead with its missile tests while the US and China blame each other for not reining in Kim Jong-un.
And a foiled plot. Australia increases airport security and launches more raids to thwart an elaborate terror attack. Thanks for being with us. I'm Amra Walker.
And I'm Michael Holmes. Welcome to CNN Today. It's, quote, a great day at the White House. That tweet last hour from U.S. President Donald Trump in the wake of another major staff shakeup.
Another Anthony Scaramucci is now out as White House communications director. A White House official says the new chief of staff, retired Marine Corps General John Kelly, wanted him gone. Sources also tell CNN President Trump was upset that Scaramucci was becoming the big story instead of him. Jim Acosta with more from Washington.
We just swore in General Kelly. He will do a spectacular job, I have no doubt.
Another wave of White House chaos swept through the West Wing. Just hours after President Trump welcomed his new chief of staff, retired General John Kelly, to the White House, his recently hired and embattled communications director, Anthony Scaramucci, suddenly stepped down.
General Kelly has the full authority to operate within the White House, and all staff will report to him.
I love the president.
It was just 10 days ago when the man nicknamed the Mooch pledged to improve White House messaging and praised outgoing press secretary Sean Spicer and then chief of staff Reince Priebus.
As it relates to Sean, it speaks volumes to who he is as a human being, who he is as a team player. Okay, so his attitude is, if Anthony's coming in, let me clear the slate for Anthony, and I do appreciate that about Sean, and I love him for it. But I don't have any friction with Sean. I don't have any friction with Reince.
The following week, he went to war with Priebus, savaging the then chief of staff in a profanity-laced rant to The New Yorker, suggesting he might be the source of White House leaks.
As you know from the Italian expression, the fish stinks from the head down. But I can tell you two fish that don't stink, okay? And that's me and the president.
The White House said in a statement Mr. Scaramucci felt it was best to give Chief of Staff John Kelly a clean slate and the ability to build his own team. But sources told CNN new Chief of Staff John Kelly had lost confidence in Scaramucci. It was an immediate sign that Kelly is aiming to bring order to a White House that's been rocked by near constant staff turmoil. The president had praised Kelly as a miracle worker in his previous job as Secretary of Homeland Security.
You look at the border, you look at the tremendous results we've had, and you look at the spirit. And with a very controversial situation, there's been very little controversy, which is pretty amazing by itself. So I want to congratulate you on having done a fantastic job, General, and we look forward to, if it's possible, an even better job as Chief of Staff.
That's right, sir.
But earlier in the day, the president took to Twitter to insist all is well, touting the nation's stock market and unemployment rate before insisting no White House chaos, a message echoed by Press Secretary Sarah Huckabee Sanders.
If you want to see chaos, come to my house with 3 preschoolers. This doesn't hold a candle to that.
The new chief of staff will find rival factions still in place. Even with Scaramucci gone, there are still sharp elbows being thrown by strategist Steve Bannon, Counselor Kellyanne Conway, even the president's family, all competing for the president's attention. Daughter Ivanka Trump hailed Kelly in a tweet as a true American hero.
We'll see you in the boardroom.
In the president's cabinet turned boardroom, Kelly was able to observe another source of White House tension, the damaged relationship with Attorney General Jeff Sessions, who's gone from being trashed publicly by Mr. Trump last week to sitting across the room from him silently today.
Let's talk more about this with CNN political analyst John Avlon, who is in New York. He is the editor-in-chief at The Daily Beast. John, always good to see you. I mean, you might as well get whiplash trying to keep up with this revolving door, right? Always something to talk about. We're happy to have you, John. What was your reaction to Scaramucci's resignation or firing, however you see it? And does it suggest that John Kelly is actually more in charge than we thought?
Look, absolutely stunning, but the Marine took out the Mooch today. I mean, this was one of the big questions about John Kelly taking this job. He's a general. The White House is objectively in chaos, no matter what the president tweets. And one of the big factors of that was Scaramucci announcing only 10 days ago that he would report directly to the president. That kind of a structure does not work if you're trying to bring order to a chaotic environment. And it's very clear that Kelly simply said that that would not work, and Scaramucci was too much of a distraction, and he had to go. Objectively, it's hard to see how anyone could debate that. But this is somebody who had really paraded his personal loyalty to the president and had already taken out two very senior staffers early on in his brief 10-day tenure. So it's a stunning turn of events, a pretty stunning fall from grace. We'll see whether he gets another role in the administration. That door is apparently still open. But Kelly asserting his influence as chief of staff, and the mooch is on the loose. He's gone.
He is indeed. It's interesting with General Kelly. I mean, the Marine Corps guy is probably going to be like boot camp there. There's going to be guards at the Oval Office door to stop people wandering in and out. Everyone reports through him. But is he going to have better luck than Reince Priebus did at influencing the president, tempering him?
Well, what he has going for him is the fact that the president really likes the company of generals. He respects them. He respects their leadership style. And that's likely to engender a degree of respect and a willingness to listen that Reince Priebus just could not cobble together with all the different factions at war in the White House. He never had the president's full support or respect. John Kelly comes into the office having that. However, at the end of the day, tone comes from the top. And if the White House is in chaos, it's because the president himself is disorganized and sends disorganized messages, not only on Twitter, but also in every interpersonal interaction he seems to have. So can Kelly tame the president, in effect? Can Kelly tame Donald Trump? Trump's going to Trump, guys. I think we've learned that by now. The question is whether he will submit to a greater degree of discipline and decency, courtesy of John Kelly. And I think that would be good for this administration and probably the country as well. Only time can tell. But betting on Trump to change has not been a winning bet so far these past 6 months or these past 2 years.
John, remind us of the role of the White House Chief of Staff and his influence on the president's ability to actually get things done.
Sure. For international viewers, it is an enormously influential position, probably second only to the president. But it really fills a number of different roles. It's someone who needs to be the president's chief advisor, also his gatekeeper, and also boss to the rest of the administration and the White House. So it requires a highly disciplined mind, someone the president has full confidence in, and a high degree of delegation. You know, Jim Baker, who was famously chief of staff to both Ronald Reagan and George H.W. Bush, only man to hold it twice, also said that there are two ways to look at the job. You can look at the chief or of staff. He thinks people who focus on the of staff part end up doing better in the service of their nation and their president than people who try to bring a lot of glory on themselves.
Interesting, yeah, fascinating. I mean, the ousted Chief of Staff, Reince Priebus, I mean, he was seen by a lot of people as, if you like, the Republican representative in the West Wing. With him out, has the party been damaged in a way by not having a voice, a man in the West Wing?
Well, that's a fascinating question. And you know, the one thing that Reince Priebus and Sean Spicer both share is the fact that they were longtime RNC staffers. They were personally close, and they were the representatives of the Republican National Committee in the Trump White House. And, you know, it's fair to say that Donald Trump's unlikely campaign basically waged a hostile takeover of the RNC. And one of the impacts of this is that the normal sort of partisans who staff administrations at high level aren't as evidence. That doesn't mean they don't exist, but this is still a White House divided by the globalists and the nationalists, people who are personally close to Trump and people he's brought on board for reasons of ideology or military bearing. But the typical kind of RNC staffer that would surface a Republican administration, Spicer and Priebus were their representatives, and they are gone.
It's going to be interesting to see how that develops. Good to see you as always, John Avlon at the Daily Beast. Appreciate it.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you, John.
Take care.
You two work it out. That message from China to the U.S. and North Korea.
On Monday, China's UN ambassador said his country is not primarily responsible for ending the nuclear standoff. That's after months of barbs from the White House. Will Ripley covering this live from the Chinese capital. Donald Trump initially very warm towards President Xi, saying he's been very helpful, then less so, and now, well, some pretty nasty Twitter claims against China.
It seems as if 2 ICBM launches by North Korea in the span of a month was enough to push President Trump over the edge in terms of his opinion about what China is doing. After he met with Chinese President Xi Jinping in the U.S. back in April, his tone was very positive, as you mentioned, but now he's back to saying that China has done nothing on North Korea, all talk. even implying that there could be trade consequences for China if they don't play ball and help the United States solve the North Korea problem in the way that the United States thinks they should, which is to essentially economically cut off Pyongyang, something that China says they're not willing to do. They believe a prosperous North Korea brings more stability on the peninsula, and they also think the United States shares a lot of the blame for the escalating tensions because of their ongoing military exercises. But you cannot dispute the importance for both China and the U.S. of their economic relationship, of the trade between the two countries, which is why we're hearing now Chinese officials essentially warning the United States not to conflate trade with North Korea. Listen.
We believe that the Korean Peninsula nuclear issue is not relevant to the bilateral trade relations between China and the U.S. because they are two different issues in different sectors.
We do know that the U.S. and China agree on 2 points. They want to see North Korea denuclearize, and they also believe that a military confrontation would be catastrophic. So there are some points of agreement that they can try to work on to come closer together on how to solve the North Korea situation. Keep in mind, though, Pyongyang isn't having direct conversations, at least on official channels, with Beijing or Washington. And so who knows what North Korea would be willing to do in terms of denuclearization. I spoke with officials there just last month. They said they absolutely will not give up these weapons. They view them as essential to their national survival. Michael and Amra.
Yeah, and speaking of attempts to solve the North Korean situation, I mean, there have been questions for some time now what it will take to bring North Korea back to the negotiating table. And you've been to the country more than most journalists. What is your take on North Korea, and will it be willing to talk, or is it a strategy where they want to first have a nuclear-tipped ICBM before they're open to negotiations?
Well, some analysts believe they already do have an ICBM that could be outfitted with a nuclear warhead, an ICBM that even the most skeptical of analysts believe probably could reach the U.S. West Coast, Los Angeles, Seattle, further inland, Denver, maybe even Chicago, and by early 2018, a weapon that reliably could strike all of the mainland U.S., including New York and Chicago. So they may already be in possession, or very close to being in possession, just months away from that kind of a weapon. As for what North Korea wants, I can tell you that comments made by the U.S. Vice President Mike Pence over the weekend, where he said that the United States insists that North Korea completely abandon their missile program and their nuclear program, that is going to be a non-starter from the North Korean perspective. They will not be willing to sit down to discussions if that is a prerequisite. What officials in the country have told me repeatedly is that they want to see the United States abandon what they consider a hostile policy. They feel like they are being bullied by the United States. And interestingly, from their much stronger ally, China, you're hearing similar language as well. I was watching state media earlier this morning, and one of the commentators said that China has become a punching bag every time North Korea launches a missile. That's not necessarily good for the United States, because if China feels like the U.S. is trying to coerce them, to force them into something, and you have China and Russia continuing the trade relationship with North Korea, then everybody's just digging in their heels as this arms race continues. Because don't forget, China had their own massive military parade over the weekend celebrating the 90th anniversary of the People's Liberation Army. They have nuclear-capable ICBMs and brand-new stealth jets, and the Chinese President Xi Jinping says it's very important at this time that China continue to strengthen its own military.
All right. Will Ripley, live for us there in Beijing. Thank you as always, Will.
Well, the Kremlin says the Russian President Vladimir Putin has the right to retaliate further against the U.S. over looming sanctions, but that is not his main focus right now.
Moscow says Washington must choose which staff will leave Moscow after ordering huge cuts to the U.S. diplomatic mission. Brian Todd reports on how this will impact intelligence gathering.
Vladimir Putin hits back, retaliating for U.S. sanctions on Russia.
I thought it was time for us to show that we will not leave this without an answer.
Putin announces U.S. diplomatic missions in Russia will be cut by 755 people, a huge chunk of the staffs at the U.S. embassy and consulates. The Kremlin also plans to confiscate 2 properties operated by the U.S. government in Russia, a storage facility in Moscow and a country house outside the city. Veteran spies warn if American diplomats have to leave Russia, intelligence assets could be lost.
You hide the spies, the CIA spies, the case officers, within the people who do their day job. So if you only have so many people that are allowed in the embassy, that means that it's going to necessarily reduce the amount of people that you can use to gather intelligence. And that's a problem.
Intelligence experts say it's an open secret that many Americans working under the title of diplomats in Russia and their Russian counterparts in the U.S. are spies. Former CIA case officer John Cipher worked in Moscow.
U.S. case officers, intelligence officers on the street in Moscow are strategic assets meant to meet strategic Russian sources. Whether it's a short meeting or whether there's other means to exchange information via technical means or what have you.
I think they may know about you.
Experts say the scenes depicted in popular spy shows like The Americans, with dead drops, clandestine meetings, and fake identities, are not that far off from real life.
Dead drops and signal sites and brush passes and clandestine meets, spies still use those because they work. But more and more we're seeing a massive transition from the old spy methods to cyber espionage.
It's always been a dangerous game in Moscow.
The KGB owned the city, and they followed everyone everywhere.
Martha Peterson was a covert CIA officer in Moscow in the 70s. Featured in the CNN original series Declassified, she recounted how her cover was blown during a dead drop. She was arrested, interrogated all night, then kicked out of the country.
They put the dead drop down in the middle of the table on a piece of Pravda newspaper. They then began the interrogation. The chief interrogator was a very angry middle-aged man.
Cipher says an American spy in Russia has to always assume they're being monitored.
If I got up at 2 in the morning and walked outside, there would be a team of people there to follow me everywhere. And then they would have people to listen to the tapes of all my discussions in my house, watch videos of that. They would interview everybody I came in contact with.
Intelligence veterans say the Russians have a couple of distinct advantages over the United States in spycraft. They say the Russians have many more spies here inside America than the U.S. has in Russia. And they say the Russians often recruit regular Russian business people and travelers to do their spying for them. People like Russian commercial pilots, bankers, journalists. U.S. spy agencies, they say, don't use those tactics. Brian Todd, CNN, Washington.
And a short break here on the program. When we come back, Australian authorities say they have smashed what they call an elaborate terror conspiracy to bring down an airliner. And a new report suggests the plot's details were particularly sinister.
Also, more protests lie ahead as Venezuelan President Nicolas Maduro claims a sweeping election victory, but the U.S. is taking new actions against him. This time it's personal.
From city skylines to beautiful beaches, going green could be easier than you think.
I fight to stop wasting food.
We're in the middle of the 6th mass extinction, and people need to know about that.
I'm working on trying to find solution to the invasion of plastic bottles.
Join me, Nikki Shields, as we meet everyday conservation heroes all across the world.
Wednesday on CNN, in association with Curlescar, enriching lives.
On the next Living Golf, we tour the UK to meet some of the country's greatest golfers. Northern Ireland's Rory McIlroy adds star power to the Irish Open.
The field itself is one of the strongest that we get on a European tour now. It's massive.
Scotland's Katrina Matthew previews the Solheim Cup. And an Englishman in Wales, Nick Faldo, with a promising young caddy.
Great shot.
Living Golf, Thursday on CNN, in partnership with Rolex.
Join Becky Anderson and meet the people shaping culture across the region. This month, we discover 3 artistic pioneers, each with an intriguing double life that allowed them to break the mold in the streets, in the military, and in the palace, challenging perceptions and revolutionizing the world of art inside the Middle East. Saturday on CNN, in association with MISC.
This is no man's land.
were on a mission to rescue stranded migrants. Best somehow managed to survive for 24 days in the desert, but most with her didn't. Agadez is the gateway for migrants en route to Europe, and it is also about to become the site of 21st century warfare technology.
Niger is kind of a focus area of multiple threats to the United States.
This is the crossroads of the war on terror, of hope and despair.
Welcome back, everyone. Australian police raided 5 properties in Sydney on Monday as they raced to crush an alleged terror plot to take down an airliner.
Authorities aren't saying much, but a major Australian newspaper is reporting the terrorists plan to use an explosive device to release poison gas. Charisse Pham joining us now from Sydney with more on the investigation. What's the latest, Charisse?
Well, Amber, the latest is that major Australian newspaper reporting that the gas would have been released and would have killed all the passengers on board a plane. Now, officials are keeping it close to the chest as to the details regarding this plot. They're calling it a very elaborate conspiracy to bring down a passenger plane. And that is new language. That's something we haven't really heard from the Australian government before, elaborate conspiracy. So they're saying that this was a very credible threat. Now, one counterterrorism expert that we spoke to said, look, if this was an attack that involved gas or chemicals, it would have been something that would have been very, very elaborate because the handling of chemical devices and putting it onto a device and getting it onto a plane, that would have been very difficult because chemicals and gases are very volatile. So we will know more in the coming days. Officials will be coming out and giving a statement hopefully in the next few days, and we'll know a little bit more about this plot, Amara.
All right, Charisse Pham reporting from Sydney. Thank you, Charisse.
Well, months of deadly violence and political unrest in Venezuela have reached a tipping point as President Nicolas Maduro celebrates an election victory.
But the vote is being criticized by leaders around the world as an assault on democracy. The U.S., one of the strongest voices, is responding by slapping sanctions on President Maduro himself.
Leila Santiago has the details from Caracas.
Michael, that gives President Maduro and his administration the opportunity to point the finger at the United States as interfering what they say should be something that is about sovereignty for the country of Venezuela. I actually talked to somebody from the Trump administration today and asked them that very question. If they worried that in doing so, it would empower or embolden President Maduro, and they said they were not worried about that because they believe it was about taking action to defend democracy. Now, President Maduro has not made any public statements as a reaction to the announcement of the sanctions today, but we are expecting, I spoke to a Venezuelan government official who said you should expect him to be making some comments very soon on this. It's unclear what type of an impact it will have on him, given that we don't know exactly what type of assets he may or may not have in the United States or in dealing with the United States. But one Trump administration official said either way, whether he does or doesn't have much, this will have an impact on any sort of international banking that he may need on a personal level.
Yeah, and critics say that this is a power grab by President Maduro. We know that this Constituent Assembly is quite powerful and actually, in theory, even more powerful than the president himself. Any indication as to how quickly this assembly will move, Leila, to rewrite the Constitution and hence give Maduro more powers?
Well, we know in a matter of days, the new assembly will gather. This is more than 500 new members, one of which, by the way, includes President Maduro's wife, and they will gather to begin their task of rewriting the Constitution. But how quickly this will go is still uncertain. There's a lot of uncertainty, not only with the Constituent Assembly, with the rewriting of the Constitution, with what could be more power for President Maduro, and also on the streets. While it has been a relatively quiet day, a lot of people are just waiting to see what will happen, how quickly this Constitution will begin writing that this assembly will begin writing that Constitution, and what type of an impact the international pressure, because it's not just the United States, talking about Guatemala, Colombia, Mexico, among others, the European Union, what type of an impact that pressure and those sanctions could have. Because one more thing, the United States has moved forward with sanctions on individuals, but what they have not touched is the oil industry. There is talk. I know that the administration is debating about whether or not they will do that in the near future, and that is something that could not only impact President Maduro and his administration, but that is something that could impact the people of Venezuela, because that's where a lot of money comes in, the money that does come into the country that's now experiencing food and medical shortages is something that is dependent on trade with oil.
Our thanks to Leila Santiago for that report. Meantime, an attack targeting the Iraqi embassy in central Kabul has killed 2 people. Afghanistan's Interior Ministry says both victims were embassy staffers and both were Afghan. 3 Afghan police also wounded in this attack. The ministry says embassy workers went after the attackers with machine guns. It's not clear if they were killed. Just 1 week before the presidential election in Kenya, the body of a senior election official has been discovered. Police in Kenya say Chris Masando was murdered. He'd been missing since Friday, and his body was discovered Monday. Masando had a key role in voter registration and results for the country's election commission. His death could put a cloud of suspicion on the results following allegations of fraud and violent outbreaks in recent elections. Coming up here on the program, we will hear from longtime diplomat Nicholas Burns about the daunting global challenges facing President Trump's White House. Plus, the British Prime Minister makes a big announcement about what will happen to free movement between the EU and the UK after Brexit.
From the rising of the sun to its setting, this is Miami, seen from a new perspective, where the magic city reveals luxurious living.
This is the classic, isn't it? The red Ferrari.
Iconic landmarks.
Welcome to the Villa Costa Arena. Wow, it's beautiful. This was Donatella Versace's private room.
And extraordinary experiences.
I'm James Williams, and this is Miami in 24 hours.
Wednesday on CNN, in association with Qatar Airways. CNN Supercharged. Plug into the first ever all-electric racing series, Formula E. Go behind the scenes with Nikki Shields in the cities hosting the E-Prix action. Meet the drivers racing through downtown street circuits across the globe. And check out the technology driving us all towards a greener future. CNN Supercharged, Sunday on CNN, in association with DHL.
I genuinely think there's something very magical about this part of the world. I feel so lucky that I get to spend time out here.
I always think of effortless and ease and elegance. It's completely inspiring.
Thursday on CNN.
For somebody to tell you their story, it's something I take really seriously, and it's not something you can just parachute in and ask somebody to open their heart to you. To peel away the layers to get to the heart of the person who you're telling a story about.
France will never give up against the terrorists.
And delve beneath the surface of what's happening. You can hear their story, and you're going to do their story justice. You have to show yourself to them. How high was the water? The water was as tall as that tree. CNN's the right place to tell their story.
I'm Namal Bagher in Sinjar, Iraq, and this is CNN.
Hello, everyone. Welcome back to CNN Today. I'm Amra Walker.
And I'm Michael Holmes. Time to update you on the day's top stories, and sources tell CNN that the new White House Chief of Staff told the White House Communications Director, Anthony Scaramucci, he was losing his job.
A source tells us he spoke with Scaramucci earlier Monday, and he had no plans to leave. A White House official said Kelly thought Scaramucci was not disciplined enough for the job. China is dismissing demands from Washington to rein in North Korea. The Chinese ambassador to the UN says it's mainly up to the U.S. and North Korea to ease tensions and resume dialogue.
On Monday, the U.S. president said, quote, "We will handle North Korea. It will be handled. We handle everything." The Kremlin is leaving it up to Washington to decide which staff members to remove from its diplomatic missions in Russia.
President Vladimir Putin ordered the U.S. to cut its personnel by 755 in retaliation for a sanctions bill, which Congress approved and now awaits President Trump's signature.
Let's bring in Ambassador Nicholas Burns from Cambridge, Massachusetts, a former U.S. Undersecretary for Political Affairs and former U.S. Ambassador to NATO. Always a pleasure, Mr. Ambassador. We'll get to the international stuff in a moment, and there's plenty of it. But I first wanted to get your thoughts on what the departure of Anthony Scaramucci after, 10 days on the job says about the White House.
Well, I think it says that General Kelly, the new White House Chief of Staff, is firmly in charge. The president has not had an empowered individual in that role, and traditionally our presidents have done best in modern times when there's a strong chief of staff, there's discipline and structure in the White House, there's a uniform regularity to how ideas are shaped and how decisions are made. And this is an early indication that General Kelly has been empowered, that he's a very serious, accomplished individual, and he wants to have authority, and he ought to have authority over the White House staff. So frankly, I think it's good news for those people who hope to see a chaotic White House become a little less chaotic and a little more organized. Yeah, it could be some quivering at a Marine Corps general walking into the office with all that brings with it. Let's turn to those world affairs now. Heard Donald Trump on North Korea earlier today say it will be handled. But what might that mean, given the president, has criticised China for not doing enough, but we don't know anything else really on the strategy list? I think the president is trying to reassure Americans that this very difficult problem is not going to end up as a true crisis. When Americans hear that the North Koreans might have an intercontinental ballistic missile with a nuclear warhead on top that could reach Western Canada and the western United States in the next year or two, that's a frightening proposition for a lot of people. I think that the administration have some significant people, General Kelly, General McMaster, Secretary Tillerson, Secretary Mattis. These four people understand that we've got to have a policy that's tightly coordinated with Japan and South Korea. We are going to need China's help. But President Trump now, I think, has understood what I think his predecessors understood. China is not going to put undue leverage, use undue leverage against the North Koreans. You're going to have a regional group that gets together to sanction the North Koreans, to try to let the North Koreans know that any attempt at further development of their nuclear weapons is going to be met with a firm economic and political response. And at some point, there are going to have to be negotiations to try to freeze this program. That's a very tall order, but that's where the president needs to go now, back to basics and tightening that relationship with Japan and South Korea in particular. And whether the U.S. might have to give a little at the end of the day. The administration, though, says it has no plans to go to the UN Security Council after the latest test and all that is going on. It's interesting that U.S. Ambassador to the UN, Nikki Haley, said this, and I'll just read you the quote: "The time for talk is over. There is no point in having an emergency session if it produces nothing of consequences." That's the thing, though. If there isn't an emergency session, if there isn't an appetite for talk, what is there then? Is it time for talk and for the U.S. to say, maybe give a little? Well, it's certainly time for talk among China and Russia, Japan, South Korea, and the United States. At this point, there isn't going to be much gained by having negotiations with North Korea. The North Koreans might well refuse that. But those are the parties that historically, over the last several decades, have tried to handle this crisis and put North Korea into a position where it cannot pose an immediate danger to its neighbors. So I think that's the first order of business. It may be that the U.S. concluded over the weekend there was no need, or actually no utility, in a meeting of the Security Council, because Russia and China have taken quite opposite public views from the U.S. over this past weekend. That may be because of these tweets by President Trump that were very critical of China over the weekend. Yeah. Let's turn to Russia now, and those
moves to slash numbers at US embassies and consulates, payback if you like. We've got the new US sanctions on Russia. If Mr. Putin had hoped for a Trump presidency that would help Russia, has that backfired on him? Where is that relationship headed?
Oh, I think it's backfired significantly. This was an over-the-top, exaggerated reaction by President Putin. Let's remember who started this. He's the one who ordered a massive cyber interference with the U.S. national elections in 2016, the invasion of the computer system of the Democratic National Committee. They got into the databases of some of our states here in the United States. So he's at fault. He's trying, I think, to show that he's strong at home, but obviously he's overreacted. I think right now, President Putin has clearly, he's been advised that he can't deal with Donald Trump and expect to get many concessions because the Republicans in the Senate and House have repudiated the Trump policy. There were huge margins of support for these sanctions resolutions here in the U.S., in the Senate and House, to sanction Russia because there's such strong public outrage over what Russia did in our election. So I think that President Trump has been backed into a corner. His policy has been discounted by his own party, and there's going to be a tough American line for quite some time against Russia.
All right, coming up, as Britain looks towards Brexit, some EU citizens are wondering about their freedom to move between the EU and the UK. What will come of this major pillar of the European Union? You're watching CNN Today.
From city skylines to beautiful beaches, going green could be easier than you think.
I fight to stop wasting food.
We're in the middle of the sixth mass extinction, and people need to know about that.
I'm working on trying to find solution to the invasion of plastic bottles.
Join me, Nikki Shields, as we meet everyday conservation heroes all across the world.
Wednesday on CNN, in association with Kirloskar, enriching lives.
The markets of the Middle East are some of the most important in the world today, with opportunities around every corner and development that never seems to stop. The Middle East is investing in its future, establishing new relationships every day. But what does the next decade look like for these emerging markets? I'm right in the middle of it, bringing you the answers and analysis you can only get on CNN.
Marketplace Middle East, Sunday on CNN. All new Inside Africa. Unlocking the mysteries behind the continent you thought you knew. Musicians lay the groundwork for a rock revolution in Kenya.
We're trying to break boundaries. We're trying to cut across the board.
Inside Africa, today, only on CNN, in association with Zenith Bank.
The CNN show where you drive the conversation. A lot of the viewers are agreeing with Aisha at this point. Join me, Max Foster, and our panel of guests for a lively discussion on the political stories that you want to talk about.
Don't believe everything the EU says, nothing the British say.
Have your say on Facebook Live. One of the viewers has just been saying it feels like a reality show over there. Your questions and comments live from around the world.
CNN Talk with Max Foster, Friday on CNN.
Welcome back, everyone. One of the biggest questions surrounding Brexit has been, will EU citizens still be allowed to freely move to the UK after it leaves the Union?
Well, the answer, a flat no. The Prime Minister's office says free movement, a pillar of the EU, will end in March 2019. CNN's international diplomatic editor Nick Robertson has more.
Well, what this means is any EU citizens arriving into Britain after the end of March 2019 won't be able to walk in just as they do now and show their passports. It will feel the same, but their arrival will actually be registered. That's a significant change here. What it appears that 10 Downing Street is trying to do is add some clarity to this issue that's become clouded over recent days. What we do know, and this is what Downing Street has also said, is that last week the Home Office here Amber Rudd, the Home Secretary, gave some details about what EU citizens would be entitled, able to do, those who are already living in Britain. And that what was laid out there was that any EU citizen who's been living in Britain prior to this date, now that date, the end of March, has been specified, any EU citizen in Britain before that date will be able to apply for settled status, and they'll be able to get that status once they've been in Britain for 5 years. However, what remains unclear are many things, and one of the significant items that's unclear is what happens to anyone who arrives after that date, the end of March 2019, during what's been talked about as a transition period. Again, the government isn't saying how long this transition period might be, only there's an expectation now that as Britain leaves the European Union, there will be a transition period. So what happens to an EU citizen arriving in Britain during the transition period and after the end of March? Will they also be able to get that settled status? That remains unclear. So there's a lot of questions here that are really yet to be answered. Nick Robertson, CNN, London.
Turning now to a somber anniversary in Belgium. Today marks the 100th anniversary of the horrific World War I Battle of Passchendaele.
The casualties immense, more than 500,000 Allied and German soldiers. European royalty joined thousands of relatives of those who fought in one of the bloodiest battles of the First World War.
Thinking of these men, my great-grandfather remarked, I have many times asked myself whether there can be more potent advocates of peace upon earth through the years to come than this massed multitude of silent witnesses to the desolation of war.
Private Edward Michael Batten, 13th Platoon, D Company, 45th Battalion, Australian Imperial Force. Killed in action on the 12th of October, 1917.
I staggered up the hill and then dropped over a slope into a sort of gully. It was here that I froze and became very frightened, because a big shell had just burst and blown a group of our lads to bits. There were bits of men all over the place. A terrible sight. Men just blown to nothing.
He said to me, am I going to die, mate? I said, don't be stupid, fella. You're going to be all right.
Flanders means endless endurance. Flanders means blood and scraps of human bodies. Flanders means heroic courage and faithfulness unto death.
A soldier of the Great War, known unto God.
A very sombre moment indeed. And we are bidding farewell to two legendary actors, by the way. The playwright and actor Sam Shepard lost his battle with ALS, also known as Lou Gehrig's disease.
Shepard wrote more than 40 plays, winning a Pulitzer Prize for one of them, and may be best known for his role in the film The Right Stuff, for which he received an Oscar nomination. Sam Shepard was 73.
And Jeanne Moreau, the French actress who became the face of the new wave, has died at the age of 89. Now, she starred most notably in Jules and Jim.
French President Emmanuel Macron remembered her as an artist engaged in the whirl of life. And remember, you can check out anything you might have missed or may want to see again on our Facebook page. Just go to facebook.com/CNN Today to watch the best interviews from our shows.
And do like us while you're there, because it makes us feel good. You can keep up with us on Twitter as well, at CNN Today or at Amra CNN and at Home CNN. I know I pointed at you, clearly at Amra CNN. Thanks for watching. I'm Michael Holmes.
I'm Amra Walker. Stay tuned. World Sport is next.